Qualified in 2008. A bit of my background, I started working in operating theatres, and then I did a short stint in a cath lab, and then got into infection prevention and control. Um, so my experience with mental health is quite an interesting one. I've got two kind of pivotal stories to tell. The first one um, is from 2018, and then from 2020, I developed long COVID after a COVID infection. So I'll start with 2018. So in 2018, I was treated for depression and anxiety via my GP. It was a difficult time. It was a very long time coming, really. I spent years kind of with stresses, just general life stresses. Looking back, I was probably a bit burnt out and hadn't really recognised the signs. I had bereavements um, when I first qualified as a nurse in 2008. It was a difficult time. My father-in-law had become ill, so we had to help support family a lot there. So I was working full time and splitting my time between home life, organising a wedding at the time, and supporting my partner's family. Um, and yeah, then we moved to Brighton from where we were living in Watford. Um, and things were okay. My husband's job was very stressful. And again, I felt quite burnt out, and it was starting to manifest more as digestive issues. So I got diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, but things seemed a lot worse than just a simple case of IBS. So that was primarily causing a lot of issues for me because it meant that I didn't want to leave the house. I was increasing sickness and absence at work. Um, I had to really manage my diet and just find different ways to try and um, just control my life. Really, it just became really difficult. Um, then my husband changed jobs, so we ended up moving up north. So at the moment, I live in Yorkshire. So this was 2014 by this point. So I moved up north, and I felt like it was a bit of a fresh start, really. Because I got a new job in Leeds. It was a band hire, and I felt quite excited and was like, right, this is the big chance. I'll try something new. Um, but again, all those kind of life things that had piled up um, were there, just building and building, and my bowel issues were still there and getting worse and worse. So I eventually got referred to a gastroenterologist. It took about a good 18 months to get diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. And in that time, work was always so busy, and anyone working in the NHS knows just winter pressures and how hard work can be, and teams. I had quite a good team, but there were moments of toxicity. Certain team members, there's always kind of clashes, and it was just a very high energy area. So working in IPC, you end up working across every hospital department. So you're constantly meeting new people, new situations. Everyone within your team has their own pressures and workloads. Um, so sort of managing that and ill health and trying to commute every day. I just got really tired. And then decided to buy a house because life's stressful enough, so why not? And then, of course, as we put the offer into the house, I found out I was pregnant. Because I don't do anything by halves. Then during my pregnancy, again, more things kind of building. I don't know why. Like I know the big kind of thing with work is pregnancy isn't an illness or a disability. So a lot of people just kind of actually just crack on. But I had a few issues and my back, I had bad back during pregnancy. Obviously the bowel issues, which I was trying to manage, but I couldn't have certain medications because obviously the pregnancy. Again, commuting and working. At the time, there was Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone, and we were a bit of a local hub for cases that were coming back, possibly from overseas. And I remember having a quite heated debate with my boss because she wanted to send me, at the time, I think I was about 5 months pregnant, to a ward where we had a suspected case coming for testing, which was negative. But at the time, I kind of said, "Oh, I don't think it's a good idea to send someone pregnant, as the World Health Organization puts that as one of the biggest kind of risk factors for viral hemorrhagic fevers." So yeah, I kind of had to advocate for myself a lot during that pregnancy, and that kind of wore me down a bit because it was just constant having to fight for sort of my work rights, and to just be treated and respected at work, really. And then I ended up going on maternity leave early, just because by the 7 or 8 months pregnant, I just had enough and just thought, right, I need to just get through this long last stretch. Um, and we're having a debate about dropping my hours once I come back from maternity leave, and I got told that I wouldn't be able to. Maybe I'd be able to drop a day or half day. And again, it was very difficult trying to think and worry about how we're going to juggle childcare and things. But again, I thought, well, that's for a 9 months to a year's time problem. So I just kind of went and just thought I'd figure it out when it happens. Again, because I don't do anything by halves. I When it came to having my daughter, I went into labour, but for whatever reason, um, the midwives misdiagnosed a kind of early labour complication. So my hind waters had broken, we believe now, but the midwife didn't spot it. So I got sent home and kind of kept bouncing between the hospital and home. And in the end, the day my daughter was born, we kind of had to demand that they let me come into the hospital. And I ended up having an emergency C-section. And my daughter, she survived, but sadly, yeah, we had like a crash C-section. So I can remember laying there on the table, and just going completely numb, sort of emotionally numb, hearing the crash bleeps go off. Um, so yeah, to kind of add to all the life stress building up to years of building up, that kind of was a nice cherry on top. So I think I took my daughter home. Fortunately, I said she survived and we were okay. And I think I was just in survival mode for months then. I don't think I ever really addressed the factor that I possibly had some kind of postnatal depression. Never got picked up by the health visitors and people like that. I think part of me just wanted to kind of hide it and not make a fuss, and I could manage it. I'd been managing okay all this time with all these other stresses. Um, After pregnancy, my bowel issues came back. I was bouncing between the gastroenterologist and home, and just having loads of tests again. Um, my doctor had changed, and I didn't really get on with the new doctor that I had. They weren't very helpful. Um, my daughter was thriving; she was doing fine, but again, it was all that kind of, what am I going to do next with work and things. And I managed to find a new job close to home. So when my daughter was about 7 or 8 months old, I went back to work, but I started at a new hospital, uh, just a mile from my house, as a band seven. So I took a promotion. Again, as I say, I don't do anything by halves, do I? Um, I thought, this would be good because it'll give us that work-life balance. So I went to work, daughter went to nursery, everything was okay. But again, the bowel issues were there. My new team were okay, but to be fair, looking back, it was quite a toxic workplace. Um, the winter pressures were there a lot. It was very different to places I'd worked before. My manager was very controlling and micromanaging. Um, but at the time, I could deal with that. I was just kind of muddling through. So then around 2018, things came to a head. My bowel issues were horrendous. I couldn't leave the house. Um, I was just so irritable. Um, I just remember the time my poor husband. I was just horrible to be around. I remember we went on holiday to Portugal. Um, we met some family, like my husband's family members there. Sort of went on a family holiday. My daughter was about 2, um, and I got severely sunburnt on my face, and the holiday didn't end up being the best. Just it was very difficult with a toddler and adults that weren't used to children, and it just ended up being quite stressful. So we came home because we'd only booked to go for a few days, and I was unwell whilst I was on holiday. I think I developed food poisoning to top things off. Um, so we got home, and I just remember for a few days just feeling awful. And just one evening, my husband just sort of said to me, what is wrong with you? And I just burst into tears and said to him, I don't know, I just want to die. Um, and of course, he was taken aback because although I'd been awful, I don't think he'd ever imagined that that would be where that conversation would be going. And I sort of told him that for weeks now, I've been having intrusive thoughts. Um, I'd never made plans to harm myself or to kill myself or anything like that. I just would be having really random intrusive thoughts. So I'd sort of be somewhere and be like, I wonder what would happen if I just jumped over that balcony or something, or I wonder what would happen if um I don't know, someone came in and found me dead in that cupboard, or it was really weird because I was just really random thoughts. Nothing particularly triggered them. Um, I'd just be sitting there and just suddenly be, sort of fantasizing what would it be like if I wasn't here? What if I wasn't alive anymore? Um, what would that be like? What would it be like for my family? And yeah, it's just obviously that is very stressful to kind of go through that. And then again with the bowel issues and not wanting to leave the house and just being tired and irritable, not feeling great. So fortunately, my husband said, right, well, this can't go on. We need to sort of help you. So to start off, I phoned in sick to work because again, work was a stressor in that too. Occupational health for my work had access to a counselling service. So as a kind of an emergency, acute dealing with it, I rang and spoke to a therapist through that, which was quite useful. Um, it's interesting because I'll come back to this a bit later, but at the time they said to me, have you considered taking a break? And I was like, well, I'm going to get signed off. And they were like, no, 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 like leave your job, take a year off. And I was like, you're mad. They're like, why would I do that? Or who could do that? Um, but I agreed to them that yes, taking some time off from work would be beneficial in the short term. So they obviously, I made sure I was okay with them, went to see my GP. My GP prescribed me sertraline and referred me to a local service called Turning Point. They provide the mental health services where I live. So I got contacted by a healthcare worker who kind of triaged my problems. Um, and they prescribed me a course of cognitive behavioral therapy. And at the time, I was kind of thinking, this is rubbish. Why, this isn't going to work. But I sort of thought, no, I've got to give it a try. The medicine will take about 3 months to kick in. I think originally it takes a few months for things like that to start. Um, so I thought, I've got to give it a good try, for my family and for myself. Um, and actually ended up working quite well for my kind of issues that I was having. So the main one being the bowel issues. It was very much about asking yourself why. So if I had a moment of feeling anxious, or I was worried about the bowel things, it'd be like, well, why? And you'd kind of have to rationalize yourself out of it. And at the end of the day, it would come down to I don't want to be stuck in the loo and be late home from work. I don't want to have an accident, or um, and it, you'd be able to kind of build up ways around managing yourself, and applying that to work, and work situations of why has this happened, why have I been asked to do that, and yeah, I found it did help in the end. And I felt a bit annoyed at myself for being anti CBT at the start, because until I actually did it, um I'm aware it won't work for every situation, every kind of type of anxiety or depression, but I found for having a specific kind of cause of the issue or part of the issue, that really helped. Um, so yeah, over time, I kind of felt like I was getting my life back on track. Um, the bowel issues didn't fully kind of settle, but I think with the medicine and the CBT, I kind of helped get over the concerns I was sort of having there. Um, the pregnancy and birth issues, I think, that just kind of needed time to heal after that trauma. I got a lot of stupid comments like, oh, it's been a few months now, you can put all that behind you. And it's like, oh, it's like one of the worst things that ever happened to me. You can't just be easily forgotten. Maybe at the time I should have gone for therapy, um, or looked at more around getting support with things. I think one of the biggest worries was always worrying, had my daughter suffered any sort of long term effects. But again, it did seem to be a wound that time healed. Um, so yeah, so I kind of muddled through 2018, 2019. Then at the end of 2019, working in IPC, um, COVID-19 hit. Just before COVID-19, my mum had a heart attack. Again, unfortunately, she survived, but she was unwell around Christmas 2019. Um, I had a medical review with my GP because I'd been put on sertraline. I had regular reviews and medicine reviews just to make sure I still needed it and was supported. Um, I asked to have my dose increased because I just thought, mum's not well. We usually had a bad season anyway with Christmas and norovirus and flu. Work was just hectic, and I thought I just need that extra bit of protection for my mental health, with increasing my medication dose. I think kind of fortunately I did, because then we got the memo saying that there was a novel virus in China. Um, I think it was either Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. We were about to leave the office. And I remember having a conversation with my boss saying that's not the last we're going to hear of that. And then obviously by March we were in lockdown. Um, I think that kind of year was a bit of a blur, really. I coped quite well, I think, because obviously I had the medication increase and work was so busy, but I think it was just everyone in survival mode, all hands on deck. Um, then for some reason at the end of 2019, um, I decided to start an online shop. Um, so between work and at home, I started this online Etsy shop. It's just like a nice little hobby. Um, and then Christmas lockdown, I caught COVID for the first time, which was fun, and I didn't seem to get better. Um, and my family got COVID, and they did eventually get better. And it was very much a what's going on here moment. So I was off. I got signed off work after having the initial time off for the infection, um, and work were not happy at all, because again this was January 2020. So there was winter pressures. There was the pressure to kind of return back to normal after COVID. Although COVID wasn't over, the NHS kind of wanted to get back to how things were before. Um, so I got signed off. I had 2 weeks annual leave, the last 2 weeks of February. So I kind of agreed that I would take my sick time, then I'd have my annual leave. But then during the first week, I got called by my boss, and she said, I'm cancelling next week's annual leave because I want to let someone else have annual leave. So you'll have to come back. And I was like, well, I guess so. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I tried to go in, but I ended up working from home my first day back because I just couldn't physically leave the house. I just was so tired, just so unwell with long COVID symptoms. At the time, my symptoms were brain fog, fatigue. Um, every time I stood up, my heart rate went over 120. I'd become breathless. Um, Funnily enough, my stomach issues kind of gone, which I always find really ironic, um, given everything that had happened up to that point. Um, but yeah, I had muscle aches. I could barely walk because I had tendonitis in my feet. Um, yeah, it's just bizarre. And I was thinking, what's wrong with me? I was sleeping hours and hours each day. Um, and other people in the team were saying, "Oh, well, I had COVID. I was tired afterwards." And I'm thinking, well, there's tired, and then there's this. I've never experienced anything like it before, even with the depression before. Um, Things just didn't seem to be going right. Um, my hair started falling out. My skin uh, become really bad. My whole kind of chin area was just covered in spots. After I had my COVID vaccine, so I don't know if it was attributed to the vaccine or long COVID, or I developed a menstrual issue, which led me just constantly heavily bleeding. So I just felt worn out, and I just remember trying, but um, failing to kind of return to work, and it just became this issue that every day, my boss would be talking to me, and I said, "Could you refer me to occupational health?" Unfortunately, I got some Oki Health input with that for the long COVID to make a plan to come back. So things were a bit more structured. But again, the whole time I was kind of being treated as if I was skiving off work. Um, and so with the best will in the world, I was trying to attend in some capacity to do some work, but I just physically couldn't do anything. I was having to sleep in the day. Um, the days I did was working, that's all I did. I'd have to sleep afterwards, and it would take a day off to recover. So it was like a post-exertional malaise. Um, but the whole time, my manager wasn't very supportive. Um, I'd be getting phone calls, constant meetings. Um, I got a phone call one day, and my husband said if he hadn't been in the room and heard, he wouldn't have believed me with how rudely I was spoken to and kind of bullied into coming back physically to work. Um, so then around June 2020, my boss announced I had annual leave because my daughter was off school for the half term. So my boss announced that after I'd come back from annual leave, I would be returning to the office, and I was a bit like, "Oh, we'll see." So again, I just thought, right, I just need to get this week off over and done with. Um, then in that week, my husband had gone away, and he came home with COVID, and I caught COVID again for the second time. I think it was the Delta variant, so testing variants at that time. Um, and yeah, everything I'd kind of managed to build back up kind of got undone with that COVID infection again. In the meantime, prior to this, I had been referred to a long COVID service, but again, these weren't set up yet. Everything was still kind of early days in terms of support and treatment for long COVID. Um, so I remember having a conversation with my boss and saying, that I've got COVID again. My GP signed me off. But again, it just constant meetings. My boss wasn't happy. Unfortunately, through occupational health, I got given access to a health coach, um, which at the time wasn't necessarily appropriate because I was too unwell to actually sort of practice healthy habits as such. I mean, they have their place, and sometimes they're a useful tool. I think if you have a certain issue or a certain goal that you need to meet, and you need that extra bit of encouragement, um, that I say they have their use, but I think at that time for me, some of the stuff I learned I have incorporated now. Just about mindfulness or meditating, hydration. Just kind of maybe generic obvious things, but at the time it was useful, but not necessarily relevant. Um, but then equally, I got given access to a psychologist through work. So my team, my occupational health team, had developed a service with the trust psychology team to support staff during COVID. So I think a lot of intensive care staff got offered support, so um, to deal with any issues they had post COVID. Um, and I got given access to this as part of to try and get me back to work for long COVID, which I think was a massive help. Just to have someone qualified to validate how you're feeling, and to be a bit of a sounding board. Because the whole time, I was seeing specialists. So when I eventually got to the long COVID clinic, it's you'd find people would very quickly try and dismiss it as anxiety. Oh, it's long COVID, but it's anxiety as well. And I'd think, well, I'm not anxious. This isn't like my anxiety before. Um, it's just very difficult, to the point that went to a respiratory physio and they gave me chest breathing exercises. But again, there was this underlying, oh, it's anxiety. And I'm thinking, but I'm not anxious. I'm on treatment for anxiety, and I recognize the signs of anxiety in myself, and this doesn't feel like that. It feels like a physical. There's something wrong. And this whole time, I just remember being so frustrated, and so glad that I had my sertraline treatment and skills from the CBT, because I did heavily um, try and use that to rationalize how I was feeling. Um, so then it wasn't until about 2021, the end of 21, that I started getting more answers around health and long COVID and what my issues were. um I had to really really fight, and it was so tiring. um at one point I was having weekly meetings with my boss, and then it was also weekly meetings with my boss and HR. Then I had health coaching, then I had the psychologist, then I had the physiotherapy. So every day I'd have a meeting or two meetings. And when you've got a chronic fatigue type illness, just constantly having meetings, it was just so much. It was just too much, and that felt like all that I was doing. It wasn't so bad in the sense that the world was still kind of opening up again, so I didn't feel like I was missing out on life as much. Um, but it was very frustrating. So yeah, I eventually got to see some specialists. I fortunately had access to private health care via my husband's work. Um, and I got fed up of kind of just being given breathing exercises all the time, um, and told pace. So one of the big things occupational therapists and physiotherapists would say would be pace, but there's there's only so much you can pace, because eventually your house is really messy and you do need to tidy it. And yeah, you've got to pace, but you still need clean clothes. And yes, where I have my husband, he can't do everything. He's looking after my daughter as well, and it just got very difficult because I was sort of like, I'm doing all the things I've been told to do, but I'm not getting better. Um, so I started off by seeing a cardiac doctor. I think it's very important, if you are going to see a specialist for any health condition, if you could try and research beforehand if who's maybe the best or specialist in that area. So I started off by seeing a cardiologist, and they basically said you've become deconditioned during the pandemic, and sent me for an echo and an ECG, which fortunately both were clear. So that put my mind at ease a bit, because I knew obviously there was nothing structurally wrong with my heart, for the symptoms to be there. But I was kind of a bit annoyed, because I'm thinking, but you didn't really address the issue, because I'm not deconditioned. Because it literally was one day I was okay, and the next I got COVID, and then I wasn't okay. So there was a clear kind of cut off point, and all these symptoms started stemming from a disease. So I kind of decided then that I would see another doctor. So I thought, well, I know like with cardiac, so I'd see respiratory. And I was diagnosed with asthma. Um, and they found out that I had sleep apnea, so I was put on treatment for that. Um, Again, it didn't fix all my long COVID issues, but I really found that a lot of the breathing issues were fixed with the steroid inhaler. and I was happy that this doctor had actually listened to me. And I realised that looking at her information, she was setting up one of the local long COVID clinics. So she actually kind of knew what patients were experiencing and were happy to kind of help with that. So part of the argument wasn't trying to get her to actually believe that the illness that I had was real. Um, and yeah, so I kind of was muddling on making progress, and there was in that background the constant pressure to come back to work. Um, Redeployment was floated, and I just couldn't figure out how to make work and life work. Um, Unfortunately, I joined a lot of groups online, so I reached out to a lot of support groups, um, and people shared a lot of information about which specialists to see. So I ended up under Dr. Gupta. It's in York Cardiology. He's very good. Um, so he looked at all the information that I'd kind of gathered, um, arranged for a lot of tests that we did via post, so like a 24-hour ECG, 24-hour blood pressure, all the information my GP and respiratory doctor had sent through. So he prescribed me some ivermectin, told me that I had POTS and dysautonomia. Um, and yeah, just having that, not necessarily a label, but just having some kind of clue of what was wrong with me really helped. Um, and helped me to kind of validate how I was feeling, because by that point, you're seeing all these doctors and they're saying, oh, it's anxiety, you're deconditioned, and long COVID's not real, or we don't know enough about it yet. And it was just very frustrating. But to have someone go, I believe you, and I think this is what's wrong with you, so let's try this, just felt really positive and just such a massive help. And I thought that was a real turning point in kind of which way I'd go mental health wise. And because up until that point, I'd been hanging on. Um, Again, the work stuff was so stressful, and I think that was the biggest stressor, and the sort of menstrual issues that I was going through. But certainly just being like, right, I know what's wrong now, or partly what one of the things is that's wrong with me. I can kind of manage that. Um, so then going forward, there's that pressure to come back to work. Um, started my treatment. I was getting sorted out by the hospital for the gynecology issues. Um, so I ended up with treatment for that. Things seemed to be on the up a bit, but again, work, this whole kind of come in. So I started doing a return to work where I went to the office. It started off as a half day, then it went up to a full day once a week. Then it was going to build up for more hours. But unfortunately, when I started doing it, I just I couldn't hack it. I was just too tired. And by that point, although I'd started on treatment for the POTS, I still was having heart rate issues and fatigue issues. Um, and yeah, at this point, I felt quite scared because it became more apparent that this was kind of like the last sort of ditch attempt for my work. So my job was at risk by this point, or would be becoming at risk. Um, and yeah, I just remember being very worried, and very stressed about the all these meetings again, and it just felt like I wasn't being listened to, because I remember going in the one of the last times I went in. I suddenly got asked, could I go across to the hospital for a meeting, and I was like, oh no, I can't walk that far to the hospital. I physically couldn't walk sort of further than the end of my road. Um, and people got a bit huffy with me and were like, you're refusing to do work, and it's like, well, no, I'm not refusing to do work. I just can't do that. I can do something else. Um, any issues that happened became bigger issues. So my laptop, where I hadn't been on it for a while, had to do loads of updates. So then it became Nichola had IT issues. Nichola can't work from home because her IT issues are causing problems. And it's like, well, it's not necessarily my fault that the work um, network won't let me log on from home because it's too busy, or and all these little things that were kind of out of my control became sort of as if they were personal issues that I'd caused. Um, so it got a bit petty by the end, and I said it could have gone either two ways. And I think fortunately, because I'd had some positives and answers with my health, and I'd been to the psychologist, and they were very good at kind of helping me frame that, is it a me problem or is it a problem from externally that's pushing onto me? Um, and it became quite apparent that I necessarily wasn't the person that was in the wrong. Um, it's not, I'm not anxious. It's just that other people are being mean. It's a nice way to put it, maybe. Um, so yeah, then I went off sick again. I was signed off by my GP. And that lasted about a year. And again, all through that time, there's meetings, occupational health. Um, and then my final meeting with the occupational health doctor, and they floated the idea of ill health retirement. So I went through that process, which took a long time filling in the forms. It was really strange because suddenly um, it was decided, and HR seemed quite happy to just kind of let me just sit with no updates, which wasn't too bad because I was getting paid, but it did feel a bit like I was left in limbo. And it was frustrating, kind of not knowing what was happening, and my boss would be asking me questions and still wanting to meet regularly. And I'd be getting frustrated because there wasn't much to say or update, so there wasn't much point in meeting regularly. Um, and it just felt like I had to manage other people's emotions, and sort of as if I was having to perform for them and make them see that I was okay. Um, but yeah, eventually I applied for health retirement and ended up having to leave work. Because once you apply, you kind of agreeing that you can't do your job anymore. So I had to go through the final stage sickness meeting. Um, Again, by that point, it was really interesting because I remember the people in the interview seemed quite obviously upset to be letting me go, but I kind of accepted my fate by that point. I think it was a relief really to be going, and it kind of came back and hit me what that therapist had said back in 2018 about have take a break, like a proper break, leave nursing, leave work. And yeah, it's been really interesting because that has really helped and really worked. So it's been just over, oh, it's almost been a year now since I left work. I'd agreed September last year, but I didn't actually um, officially leave till May of this year. But just having that time, although I've not been employed, um, and there's generic kind of some worries about money, and managed to sign on for PIP and ESA, and I've looked at benefits. Um, it's been really interesting because without that having to worry about meetings and manage other people's feelings, I've actually made quite a good progress in terms of mental health and stability. Just having that space to kind of breathe and just concentrate on myself. Um, it's really helped. Because I think before I was just managing other people's expectations of me, whereas now, I just have to um, just live each day and manage myself each day. Um, so yeah, and with the ill health retirement, that hasn't been so good. So again, funnily enough, they turned around and said that I couldn't get my IHR because all my problems are due to menopause, mental health issues, my weight, and I don't think there's anything. I think it's just those, and that generally I'll get better in time. But I've had to do a counter argument to all that. So my psychologist wrote a letter saying, actually, Nichola hasn't got anxiety. She's managed it quite well, and has given a big kind of list of all of our meetings and things we discussed. So that was quite validating because again, it's that whole thing of when people keep saying to you, "You're this, you're that," you think, "Well, am I? Am I anxious? Am I? Is it me?" But you need to kind of trust in your feelings that you know how you feel. Um, so other people can't tell you how you feel. It's only you know how you feel. And if you say you're not anxious and you know you're not anxious or you're not feeling mentally unwell, then you're not. But if you know that you are, then you are. So yeah, it's been like an interesting experience with both. I mean, my biggest takeaways are for the negatives that generally working within a big organization, you get your toxic people. It can be a toxic workplace to work in. And it's about finding your things in life that you can kind of use to protect your bubble. Um, who do you have to talk to? Do you have family members, partner? It's about having that open communication. Do you have access to therapy? If you can access a psychologist, I'd recommend that. It's something that I'm maybe looking at trying to get back to again, because it was just really useful having that sounding board. Um, Positives for me, having my family, having to get up every day because of my daughter, and I've got a dog. So although I felt bedbound, there were days when, I had to get up because I had to get my kids to school. Although I physically couldn't take her, someone else had to for me. I still had to get her dressed and fed. Um, and the dog, yeah, although I wanted to stay asleep all day, I still had to let it get up and let him out to go to the toilet and things. Um, and yeah, I had my previous treatment to fall back on. So, the things I'd learned from my previous issues in 2018, I found they really helped and gave me that frame of reference of, well, what does my anxiety feel like? What does being unwell feel like to me? And being able to measure that against my long COVID issues, I could see, well, it's not me, or maybe I am sort of unwell at this point or feeling stressed. I was able to kind of maybe put words to those emotions that I was feeling. Um, and another thing, finding a good medical team. So as I was saying earlier, um, if you are in the position to find healthcare workers that can support you if there is an ongoing medical issue, or even if you're having treatment for mental health issues, it's always useful to maybe do your research beforehand, maybe access online groups. There's a lot of Facebook groups around long COVID, even messaging boards like Reddit. Um, at the time, I used Twitter as well, but I've gone off that more. So as a kind of a mental health protection, I've streamed my social media a bit to try and not take on all of the world's problems. As that can get a bit much sometimes, as well as all your life problems. But certainly, looking for your good medical team is a good help, because, as I said, I wasted time finding a cardiologist that didn't really help at all. Um, Although they gave me the peace of mind with the echo, going to someone else who was more specialist in potentially what I had, I found the best results with. Um, but yeah, so I think overall, if you are suffering, um, definitely seek help. Um, and with the IHR thing, sometimes people might try and weaponize your anxiety or mental health diagnosis to maybe deny you something, or but at the end of the day, you know how you feel. um and it's always useful to kind of maybe have that psychological support who can say, well, yeah, they're right, they're not, it's not anxiety. So don't let other health issues also be written off as being anxiety. um so yeah, I just checking over my notes, see if I missed anything out. um but certainly don't be afraid to ask for help. And I think that's the biggest thing to take away is seek help. Even if it's going to your GP, just get the ball rolling if you feel that you need treatment. Um, if you need an acute kind of treatment, see if you've got access to therapists via your work occupational health, because just having that outside sounding board could be quite useful. Someone that's not directly related to your life or hasn't got a vested interest. So, another tricky thing with work is work will always go in the best interests of the team or the work environment, whereas you've got to kind of almost be selfish, really, because you're responsible for yourself, you're responsible for your mental health, and everyone else is responsible for their problems. um but definitely take that first step to getting help if you feel that you need help. because it can be a positive experience. It's scary, but at the end of the day, if it can make you feel even a percentage better, you'd be in a better position than you are without getting help. Does anyone have any questions or any comments or anything from what I've been saying?
Thank you, Nicola, for this brilliant session. We'll just wait and see if anyone has comments or questions regarding everything that you've explained today. Seems like there's no questions or comments. So if you want to continue, and then we'll wrap up in about 9 minutes.
Okay. I realised that I think I got a date wrong back at the beginning. I think I said my mum was unwell in 2019, but it was 2018. It's funny how time kind of all runs into one. Um, the long COVID symptoms are quite interesting. I think one of the biggest takeaways from um, my long COVID issues has been I definitely had to develop a sense of humour. And humour has probably been a way that I've dealt with things a lot. So, things like brain fog, I'd forget medical appointments, and we've had to come up with different tools around the house with how I can manage my life. So, I remember one that I had to go for an ultrasound, but I'd written down the wrong date on the form in my diary, and then when it came to it, and I rang up and was like, I'm so sorry, I'm going to be late for my appointment. They're like, well, you missed your appointment. And, it's quite upsetting. But looking back, I can laugh at it now. But to sort of counteract that, we've got a nice printed out calendar on the wall for each month. And we write down each day what we've got to do. Um, in terms of mobility, I should have included this earlier because it is a big part actually of how things have gone for a positive. I bought an electric wheelchair. So a lot of people in the POTS community have mobility issues, and they buy things like walkers and wheelie walkers and things. And I was finding that I was getting fed up of being stuck indoors all the time, or if I went out, I could only go as far as that car park to the cafe, or I was missing out on family time. Um, so it's about a year, just over a year ago now, I bought an electric wheelchair, and it's been great because I've been able to go out with my family again. Um, I can go into town with my husband and daughter. We can sort of go for family walks as such. Um, it's interesting because before I always thought, oh, it's for people that can't walk and with more of a physical disability. But there are most wheelchair users are ambulatory wheelchair users. And as I said, that has been a massive help, and mental health wise, that has really helped because it means I can do stuff again. I mean, I am limited again by the fatigue and post-exertional malaise and things, but again, having the chair, you've always got somewhere to sit. I'm just able to do more things, and it's nice to be able to enjoy joining life again. Um, and I think we need to be aware of what tools are available to us to make our lives easier. If you need a chair, get a chair. If you need a calendar, get a calendar. Um, don't be worried if your house is a mess, get a cleaner if you feel you can or if you can afford that. Um, these things are there to help us, and we need to you need to make sure you use those tools because why make life harder for yourself if you don't need to? Um, so yeah, mobility aids is definitely one I'd recommend if you feel that there's something that you need, or even just a walking stick. So for days that I do feel well enough, I do have a walking stick as well. Um, and yeah, people have weird reactions sometimes, but again, I've just got a sense of humor now. I don't care. I'm out the house. I'm being me. I'm living my best life. And just doing little things for myself, I buy the weird handbags. I like to wear brightly coloured lipsticks now, and I drive around my chair in green sparkly laced up boots that everyone always comments on. Um, so yeah, I feel like I've come a long way from my initial long COVID infection. Um, Definitely just doing those little bits for yourself, finding little bits of joy, are really useful. Um, just yeah, just be yourself, just you do you, and don't care about what other people think. As long as you're happy or feeling well or doing what you can do, that's all you can ask to do. Um, I think we're so used in nursing and medicine to fitting in our boxes and behaving, um, that we've kind of forget ourselves. And just finding yourself again, can be really a real positive in supporting your mental health. So yeah, thank you everyone for listening. I'll stop waffling on now. If anyone wants any boots or handbag recommendations, I'll be happy to.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for that. If you have any resources to share, you can either put it in the chat. If you send it to me via email, then I can share with the participants and everyone who registered and have not attended. So that'll be really brilliant if you can share that, please.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this, and thank you to everyone who signed in to attend this brilliant session.
Thank you.
Thank you.